Good morning, everybody, and I appreciate everybody being here. Our big guest speaker, because I'm not that awesome, is coming in, Chetrice Mosley from the Indiana Governor's Council on Cybersecurity, and she ran into some traffic this morning, so she's a couple minutes late, and Travis is bringing her in right now. So I just wanted to start out a little bit and tell you kind of where we got the idea for our new programs, how they're going to run, and what I do, basically, because it's different and it's brand new, and we're getting a lot of attention for it. It's really good. So to do that, I wanted to talk first kind of about where we've been, specifically with cybersecurity. Traditionally, in cybersecurity, we fight technology with technology. And that sort of makes sense. Specifically, right, we like to try and keep our networks patched and make sure that we are putting up firewalls. We have IT staff on hand, and we're always looking for intruders, that type of a thing. This is very reactive in nature, right? We try to prevent as much as we can with some firewall stuff, but in essence, we wait for somebody to find a vulnerability, exploit it, and then patch that. This worked really well for a guy named Kevin Paulson in 1990, who was using the old Windows NT system. And he lived out in LA, and out there he was listening to the radio, and they had this week-long contest where at the end of the week, they were going to have about a 5-minute span, and the 10th caller got a brand new Porsche 942 SS. Pretty decent prize for a 10th caller thing. Kevin Paulson wanted to increase his odds of winning. So what he did was compromise their system. He found a loophole and a vulnerability in Windows NT, and he took control of their phone boards. And he made himself the first through 30th caller. It didn't matter what line they chose, they were all him. And he won himself a nice Porsche. Not too bad for a little bit of hacking. They found this vulnerability, they plugged it. Kevin there got in a little trouble. He did a little bit of time, and eventually they actually took him, and he now works for the government as an agent of cybersecurity. This does not work today. I skipped over some so I don't have to walk back and forth. We were just made aware of the Equifax breach, maybe one of the biggest breaches that we've had in a long time. For me, it is the most impactful breach that we've ever suffered. Prior to this, Target, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, chances are if you have a pulse and you're sitting in the room, your data has been breached at some point by some store in here. I would be shocked if, less than 20% of you have ever had an issue of identity theft in here. It's commonplace to the point where I remember when Target very first came out, and it was on the news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was a main, huge story that everybody wanted to know about and everybody was freaked out about. When they put up breaches now, Home Depot, Dairy Queen got breached recently, nobody really cares. It's become so commonplace that we read it and go, oh, great, another one. Well, if they didn't get my first stuff, then, maybe they'll get this time. What we're doing fighting technology with technology is not working. So I am suggesting a paradigm shift. I am suggesting that we change how we fundamentally look at cybersecurity. And to that point, the potential offender, they used to be able to go straight through the computer, find a vulnerability, and get at your data. In about 2000, 2002, we started seeing this shift. it shifted because we kind of spent a lot of money and we spent a lot of time putting in firewalls, amping up our technological securities. Now, there's plenty of ways that they can still be hacked and victimized and things like that, but it takes some skill. If you're going to find a new exploit, write a program, get around all that stuff, that takes time. It takes a little bit of skill, takes some knowledge and some dedication. So what we ended up seeing was, why go through all that? Right? Why should I have to spend any time whatsoever, even if I have the ability? Why should I spend any time trying to hack into your network as some illegitimate actor and pose a risk of getting caught? Instead, why don't I just go down the hall, send a phishing email, scam, call, and get somebody's user credentials? Get your student login. Get my login. As soon as I have that, I can access the network free and clear. It doesn't even register me as an intruder. The vast majority of data breaches that have happened, the people have been sitting on or in that system for a minimum of 6 months. That's over 90% of the breaches, they have been in the system for over 6 months. How in the world do they do that? Because they got legitimate access to that system. Unfortunately, our cybersecurity teams did not shift with it. Unfortunately, it became, let's fight human behavior and technology with technology. I have gone to 1 million conferences. I have talked to 1 million people from tech departments, and the overarching consensus is, they're just employees. What are you going to do? There's nothing to do. And so the relationship between the human behavioral sciences and technology have been really limited. They just never really fit together very well. My hope is that we start changing that. You may have seen this shape before, right? That triangle. This is something that we've used in criminology for a long time, decades, and it's something that's proven to work. It's essentially just called crime prevention, and instead of reacting to things, the basic idea is, why don't we try and see if we can't make it not happen in the first place? So in order to do that, we kind of move the offender out of the picture, right? We're not going to go counsel all these people who might hack into a system, try and change their mind ahead of time. Instead, what we can do is we can focus on the employees, on the target itself, the data, and on who's managing that. In street crime and normal crime, we have seen huge improvements on this over time. Everybody should be aware, assuming you're mostly crim students in here. If you're not, crime is at an all-time low, or at least since about the 60s or 50s. And a huge portion of that is due to crime prevention efforts. You're all familiar with things like community policing and hot spotting and things like that. This is all from a foundation of crime prevention. This also works with cybersecurity, right? So if you just take the same basic principles that we've been using in street crime and apply it to cybersecurity, it translates fairly well. So again, what I'm suggesting is a paradigm shift. I am suggesting that we move from this traditional spot in cybersecurity where we fight technology with technology, where we rely on what we call heuristics or best guess, right? How we spend our money in businesses right now is kind of haphazard. And you can spend $1 trillion and have the greatest network security that you could possibly make. But again, if I can go down the hallway and phish somebody's username and password, it's all worthless. So the idea becomes, does this actually work? Right? That's the big question is, all this sounds really nice and like it might work, but is there actually that much human behavior behind these cyber offenses, behind data breaches? So I spent a lot of my life, I gave up most of my late 20s and 30s, creating a database. I'm going to put up a slide real quick. I created this database by combining a number of different things from different sources. So we know a moderate amount about the breaches that have happened thus far. I used a site called Privacy Rights Clearinghouse and got as much info as I could regarding how all of these breaches have happened from 2005 until today. And I started mapping that stuff out. And we can see on this chart that hacking accounts for the largest portion of these breaches. That's straight computer hacking. Things are technological in nature. It does not include things like phishing or scamming or anything like that. Portable media, accidental disclosures, insider threats, physical loss, right? Losing papers, throwing them away when you're not supposed to with all your medical records on them. These all account for different human behaviors, where a human was the impetus into which that data breach happened. If you take it through that lens, that 25% becomes significantly less. Part of what I did was started going through all 5,000 of these cases that I have. This was 4,539. Sounds great, right? Go to grad school, it's fun. Here's what I found. Here's what I came up with. 72% of every data breach that I had in my database, from 2005 until now, had a human behavioral impetus. It was caused initially by some sort of human behavioral action. Only 28% was a pure technology-based cause. Was it outside remote hacking that, you know, somebody's sitting there with the hoodie on and doing this thing? It's not what they really look like, but only 28%. A huge majority of this stuff is human behavioral in nature. So if we look at it in a different way, if I break it down by each different sector, medical is over 90% every single time you see Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, hospitals, anything like that, are caused by a human behavioral interaction. That was the initial impetus that caused this data breach. And it goes from there: government, financial, education, and retail. Medical records are of specific interest to people attempting to get this data. It turns out that medical records are actually the most lucrative that you can have. Because of how our system is set up, and because of how the insurance system is set up, people are able to, and this is become incredibly popular recently, set up small shell corporations that look like they're doctors, get your medical records, pretend that they did some tests on you, submit it to the insurance company, make sure that they know what the insurance company is looking for, right? If somebody has the flu, they don't want to charge you for getting a cast on your arm, but they'll charge you for an exam. The insurance company pays them back, they close up the little LLC, make their money, move on, start another one. It's honestly pretty ingenious. You have to sort of hand it to them, but we need to be able to prevent this, right? We have to do something in order to stop this. So my intention is, again, this paradigm shift in how we look at cybersecurity. That we begin putting together behaviorists with the tech folks. That you can speak the same language. When we were creating these new programs, one of the things that I was talking to Dr. Woods about was, I don't want programmers in this spot. I don't want them to have to know how to program. If they do, good, sort of. But I want behaviorists. I want people who know human behavior. And where better to look for that than a criminology department, where what we do and what we ask all day long is, why did you do what you did? We set it up so that students are able to take a couple of classes out of computer science, some classes out of the business program, and of course, plenty of criminal justice classes. So that way you learn the language. Nobody's going to require you to be able to go code in Python or C++. You're just learning the basic way to talk with these people. We want you to be able to work together with them. Thus far, we've had really good success. The program doesn't even officially launch until spring. We've already got interns working both in the field and directly for a company here. They have done incredibly well. They have done beyond expectations. And we have a list of people waiting to sort of get into this. Computers, it turns out, are not going away anytime soon, right? We're pretty stuck on using them. We're probably not going to be giving them up. There's always going to be street crime, and we need to attend to that. It's important. But right now, in the entire field of criminology, we are going to be the only program doing this. We are going to be the only program that's going to start trying to merge criminal justice and criminology with the technological sciences in order to help prevent breaches by addressing human behavior, by addressing employee behavior. A lot of what I've found is that it's management incentive. However many of you out there have a private job in the private industry right now, if you have to get a task done by the end of the day, ask yourself, would the management rather me get that actually done on time? Or would it be okay if I was late getting it done as long as I use proper cybersecurity etiquette? Your management might talk to you when you start and say, oh, we're going to train you on how to identify phishing emails, on how to identify scams and people that shouldn't be here, what to do with them afterwards, right? If you go up for a raise or they go to look at how you're doing, it's not addressed. It's not a part of your raise. It's not a part of the incentive. The ability to train employees, not throw them online and take a quiz, because we all know how great that works. He said to some of his students who are in his online class right now. But especially at work, right? If you're told to take a quiz or to go learn a module or something at work and then take your quiz after it, and you can't fail it because if you get an F, then it goes right back and you can just re-answer the question. How many of you read the thing to begin with, or do you just go guess A, B, C, D until it's right and move on? This is not acceptable. This is causing this, this overload of data breaches that keeps on coming, of infiltration of systems that just are growing and growing and growing. The idea here is let's get students interested, make sure that you know you don't have to have a computer background. In some cases, I would rather you not. I want people who know human behavior. I want people to know how to change that and how to make lasting, real impressions on employees and management and identify these things, be able to prevent. With that, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to the head of the Indiana Governor's Council on Cybersecurity and a person that I'm incredibly thankful for being here, even though she had to battle a ton of traffic coming out of East Indy, Chetrice Mosley.
How many here are students at ISU? Raise your hands. How many are faculty? All right. Excellent. I think it's important, and we kind of did this with the first group, and I think it's important to kind of see where you think things are, right? And also put things in perspective. So when you're looking at me as the first cybersecurity program director of the state of Indiana, how many of you think I have an IT background? That's fair. No. So majority of you are right. I don't have an IT background. My background is in public relations, communications, and strategy. Been doing that for more than a decade, and that'll probably make a lot of sense when I start going over why the Cybersecurity Council is the way it is. Now, I think it's important because whenever I talk to employees and whenever I talk to businesses or even just a large group of people, when you hear statistics like 72% of breaches that occur happen because of a human error, people don't really think it's going to be them, right? But I want to see hands go up in that section, this section, and that section. So the first three sections, all hands up. I know, just wake yourself up. It's okay. I know. I'm going to get you out before lunch. Okay, now look to your left and right. At some point in the future, as it stands now, you will be the reason why an Equifax happens. You'll be the reason why a target happens. Now, everybody, other question, how many of you have smartphones? Like that one is easy, right? Yeah. So if you haven't already been hacked, you will be hacked. 100% of you will be hacked through your smartphone and mobile devices. You may already be right now, you just don't know. How many of you read the terms, the terms and conditions when you download an app or even download anything? Really? Wow. Believe the professor, I'm not sure about that's some pretty foresight there. I don't even do that. You know, this role has made me a little more cautious about that. But the thing is when you look at terms and use and services, you just figure for the convenience of it, you're going to go with it because a lot of times people think my information's out there, so what does it matter, right? And you don't realize that sometimes you're also approving giving all your friends information, right? And all your location services. Because everybody knows where you're at if you have a mobile device. Google knows where you're at right now. Apple knows where you're at. It's creepy. Satellites know where you're at, and definitely our government. But when you look to see bad actors out there, when you're looking at not only nation states, but just people who want to hurt people, and you want to do the most damage, the way to do it now is cyber. And we hear about it every day, right? Every day there's a new cyber news story out there. And that's only a small percentage of those who are actually reporting it, who are talking about it. There's no regulation from an order of service perspective. If a healthcare facility from the operations, not the personal information, HIPAA and personal identifiable information, there's federal regulation out there that requires them to report it. But if it is somebody hacked into heart monitors and killed people, they're not required to report it. If somebody hacks a utility and takes down energy, they're not required to report it externally. Now, I'm not suggesting that there would be any regulation for that, but the realism of that is that we only are seeing such a small piece of the pie of cybersecurity breaches and how it affects your everyday life and how it will affect every single one of you at some point, especially when you go into your career field. So even if you don't go into a career field that is technology savvy, you're going to know very quickly as this keeps on evolving that cybersecurity is going to be affecting every department in that organization, not just the technology division. So with that, Governor Holcomb continued an executive order, which is basically a large proclamation that isn't law but has a lot of force of the governor, to establish the Indiana Executive Council on Cybersecurity, which I lead up. Strategic overview, generally the basic mission is this. So like this is all fancy so you can read it so that you know exactly what the executive order says. But I always say like it's blah, 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 and then we go to what it means. What it means is nobody can do this alone. When you look at cybersecurity as a problem for a state, a government, or even an organization, or even a university, if you try to do it alone, it's not gonna work. You're gonna fail because we're so interconnected to everybody around us. Even as an individual, you're connected to everybody around you that you need everybody to fix it. So the Cybersecurity Council does that. by collaboratively bringing in public-private partnerships, Attorney General, Secretary of State, the Governor, Lieutenant Governor's Office, Commissioners of State agencies, in addition to USDHS, Secret Service, FBI, in addition to academic partners who have the theoretical side of things and some application as well, and good ideas of how can we fix this, as well as corporations and public partnerships and associations. Because it isn't only one entity alone that can fix this. The state government cannot go with one agency in state government and say, I'm going to fix cybersecurity for every single person in Indiana. It's impossible. And a lot of times organizations will plan and start doing that, and they'll get to a point where they can't be effective anymore, or they were very little effective because they need those partnerships. Now, believe it or not, sometimes state agencies don't talk to other state agencies. And state agencies don't always talk to federal agencies. And local governments definitely do not always talk to state agencies and federal agencies. So we have our own house to kind of fix, right? But when you add that complexity to, then you have private partnerships and private corporations and businesses that don't talk to government unless they have to. Who here likes to go and talk to government just for fun on a Saturday afternoon, right? Nobody calls the IRS just to say hi to the other people on the other side, right? You have to call because you have to fix something. You're never really happy to call. So the directives are basic. We're looking at creating a strategic framework for the state of Indiana, an effective governing structure. So we're looking at doing that. We also look at workforce development. We have economic development that we're looking at. We're also looking at best practices and figuring out how to respond to cyber capabilities and incidents. So when something happens, because something is going to happen at some point, then we need to know how to react to that, who to call. So that's what the council is meant to do, is work in those things, including workforce development, which I'm sure you guys get talks about all the time because you're the future of workforce development, and you are. And as the professor talked about, there's going to be a need, and a very high need, and it's not just people who have IT backgrounds. Now, how many of you, when you hear council, government council especially, or committee, how many of you think that's just a bunch of high-ups talking about a problem and not really coming up with actual solutions? That's fair. I'm the same person. So when I took this on, I came about it an interesting way. I was actually on the other side when this first started at the round, I call it version 1, right? 1.0, because I'm in IT, so you always have to put 1.0, 2.0. So I'm 2.0. So when 1.0 version, they got a bunch of higher-ups together who really had a passion for fixing the problem, and about 3 meetings in, they started to kind of almost over-talk each other and really talk about the same things because you really needed to find the depth to find the solution, right? And so I was on the other side of it. I was an executive for the Utility Regulatory Commission, and I had a couple of the leadership come to me and say, what would you do differently? What do you think about it? And I said, I don't think I'm going to bring my leadership to it as often because I'm not seeing the value for their time, but I'll definitely come to it because cybersecurity is very important to the Regulatory Commission and utilities being a critical infrastructure. But I really need framework. I need strategy. I need to know how we really are going to move the needle in cybersecurity in Indiana, because if we're just going to talk about it, I can do that too. But my understanding per this right here, which is in the executive order, is that we develop, maintain, and execute, keyword, implementation plan by creating objectives that are specific and measurable. So I'm a business person, I'm a strategist. When I see that, I get giddy, I get happy, because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're gonna do something. Like, the governor's executive order is not just saying, go talk about it. His executive order is saying, go do something about it. And that gets me, that allows me to really be happy about whatever I'm working on. So it didn't do that the first round because we were trying to figure out how to work with all these people. You had CEOs, you had governor's representatives, you had politicians, you had commissioners of state agencies, or the heads of the agencies, and then you had a bunch of techies in there, right? So how do we kind of get it all together so that it makes sense and we can actually come up with a comprehensive plan? So this is the breakout of my strategy for the group. Now, you're going to see real quickly on here, one of the things I think is kind of tells a lot is you don't see, these are 19 committees of the council. There's more than 200 members on the council. which is in government world crazy. But I drink a lot of coffee and I'm an insomniac, so I make it work. But on there, for Cybersecurity Council, not one of those working groups and committees are technology, is IT, right? Every single one of those is industry focused from a top level perspective and functionality focused. So you have government services, you have finance, defense, energy, water, wastewater, healthcare, elections, and then you have economic development, workforce development, and then the steps below of the working groups are those working groups when you're talking about personal identifiable information. I found when I was talking to all these really smart people who really want to do something that there was common themes in their discussion. We care about PII, which is the personal identifiable information. We care about figuring out what's the best way to cyber share with people. We care about what we need to do in an emergency and who we need to call. And it was the same question. It didn't matter if they were a defense company, it didn't matter that they were an energy company or a small business. It was the same question. And so I realized when you're looking at fixing a problem, you have to listen to the questions. And you have to realize that you have to put the right people at the table to solve those questions. So what has happened with other states, including ours, the first round of it, is that we had a lot of really smart people on the council, but none of them did the day-to-day on these topics. So we have public awareness and training. We have cyber sharing, cyber pre and post incident, which is what happens before and testing people's systems, and then what happens after when something happens and how do we help each other. We have cyber legal and cyber insurance, which is a whole other world that people are still figuring out and trying to figure out what the best practices are. And unfortunately, in the legal world, when that happens, people are taken advantage of. So how do we fix that? And how do we educate people so they're not taken advantage of? And we have local government who are just trying to do what they can with the very limited budgets that they have. And so they're never going to go and spend $40,000 in a cybersecurity firm for a what-if scenario. They need to go and solve, the potholes, right? They need to fix the things that are physical in their area that people are complaining about every day for good reason. That's their world, right? And then strategic resource, which is figuring out the overarching strategy and how they all relate together. So it's important to note that there's no IT specific ones where a bunch of CIOs talk about something. There are CIOs on the council, but in every one of these, they're experts in their field. So for example, the public awareness and training, there's not one IT person that's leading that. The person who's leading it is the executive director of Hoosier Press Association, and the co-chair of it is a 40-year veteran of public relations and communications who's worked internationally for NATO, has worked for a 4-star general, understands the military, but also has worked for government for 20 years, right? And has also worked for private firms and worked for public relations firms in Indiana and nationally. I needed to have the people that knew how to effectively communicate public awareness and training. I already know what I need to have them talk about, right? The top 10 do's and don'ts. We have that information. Unfortunately, it's all written by IT people, and it's given to somebody like me, who's not an IT person, and I'm like, you lost me at slide 1, because don't I have IT people for this? When, to the professor's point, more than 70% of the problem is us. It's not a technology issue. It's not an IT division issue. It's an employee issue. It's a personal issue. It is we share way too much information because we either think it's all out there or we don't care because we're apathetic, and that's fair. I've been that way too. But the key point to it is it's everybody's problem and not just one person and one division's problem. And it isn't just a business problem, it's a personal problem too. As a consumer, you go and you give your information away thinking that people are protecting your information. Businesses give your information away thinking your information is being protected because they didn't ask the vendor that has the credit card scanner that whether or not they have patches regularly, whether or not they have the right cybersecurity aspects to protect your credit card information. So they assume, a lot of businesses just assume that if they're selling technology, it's going to be the most updated technology with the most security. When unfortunately, a majority of vendors don't do that. Unfortunately, a majority of vendors aren't the most updated, which means that there are holes in their cybersecurity, in their security system, which means for the bad actor, they can get to it and get your information. So it's not anything maliciously that anybody's doing outside of the hackers. They mean to do what they're doing. But when it comes to businesses, when it comes to people, when it even comes to yourself, I know you're not purposely going and saying, hey hackers, here's all my information, please steal my identity and let me spend tens of thousands of dollars fixing that, like this poor lady who's gonna have to do that. Let me go and pay a bunch of attorneys out of my pocket. The hackers are not gonna pay for that. So let me go and go fix my reputation because somebody hacked my Facebook account, Twitter account, posted a bunch of inappropriate things. You know, some politicians have issues with that. But when you're looking at that, and of course the first thing they say is my thing's hacked. 99% of the time it wasn't, but they just don't know how to use technology. And seriously, I can't say what I know, but really don't do stuff like that. And don't send pictures, and oh my gosh, like really, like a lot of the media apps, just be careful of it. I always say, especially as a college student, whatever you post, just assume, even if it's on lockdown, that your grandma's gonna look at it. So if you're in some outfit and grandma's gonna be really disappointed, just know that that's gonna be there. And also employers look at it. More than 80% of employers now have a dedicated person looking up people in social media realms for that reason. Because they're not gonna put, if somebody is not smart about what they post on social media, that's already an indicator from a psychology perspective that they're not going to be smart about using their technology. More likely, they're going to be the ones clicking on those links. More likely, they're going to overshare information about that company. Insider threat is a real thing. People will go and from a psychology perspective, talk to you and become your friends and social engineer things out of you, and you won't even know that it's happening. Or you don't even have to do it actively. You just post everything on Twitter. So, and that's not something that I'm just saying. I do have a daughter that I tell her the same thing, but I had to go back to my Twitter when I took this job, and I was like, let me go to make sure people don't know like where I like to eat and what bands I like and that kind of stuff, or what my kids' names are, because all they have to do is say a certain amount of words and I'm gonna consider them trusted source. Or I'm gonna consider I know them because I know so many people, and I'm like, don't wanna be that rude person who's like, I don't know who you're talking about, and just assume and answer questions. Right? So that's the human nature of it all, right? So what people are looking for now, what businesses are looking for, to your professor's point, is not the person with the IT degree, is the person with the critical thinking, is the person with the problem solving, is the person who can communicate well, who can figure things out fast, who enjoy doing that. They can teach you the IT stuff. And honestly, sometimes you don't even need to know the IT stuff. It actually benefits you not to be in that world, to understand just enough to be dangerous. I wouldn't be able to see that not only do we not focus on just IT, but we need to focus on all these other elements and their subject matter expertise of how to do things effectively and quickly. So how do you do that, right? So when you get a whole bunch of smart people in a room, much like what teachers have to do when they have a whole bunch of students, right? How do you get all different levels of expertise and knowledge and interest? Because you're going to have people that just aren't as interested in the technology piece; they're interested in their world. Energy company doesn't really care what's happening in the healthcare world outside of the energy goes out, then the healthcare providers are upset and they need to go and do that. But outside of that, they're not going to care about their devices getting hacked, and so that's not their world. They're utilities, right? So how do I get really smart people, association presidents, CEOs of companies, regulators in the room? How do I get them all in there and give me solutions without us going around and around in a circle? We give them framework. And this framework is similar to the framework that you already use naturally whenever you guys create a paper, whenever you look at something, whenever you're researching a computer you want to buy, whenever you're wanting to buy something cute on Amazon, but you want to make sure that you're not getting screwed over by the price, or the seller is not a bad seller. You already do this naturally. And so what I figured out when I was trying to figure out how do I get 19 groups of very big professionals within their industries all throughout Indiana, not just central Indiana. We have people from north, we have people from south, we have it all over, and we even have people from out of state. How do I get them all on one page? So I take it back to the 4-step process of strategy, which is this process that is yet in my career has never failed me, and I'm really hoping as the first cybersecurity program director, it doesn't fail me now, because it's going to be really embarrassing. I'm already have to deal with the fact that being the first, everybody will be able to do my job better than me after, but trying to figure out how to make it as simple as possible. So what you don't do is you don't go to your boss and you give him a blank piece of paper. I don't know what the problem, here's the problem, what's our solution? If you want to get far in life, you want to go with the problem and you want to come up with solutions. Even if they're not the best solutions, they start somewhere. Because frankly, the boss will know, well, that won't work because I've done that. Most of the time it's based on experience, right? So how can I give something to this leadership, cybersecurity leadership in Indiana, and the leadership within those realms, and be able to do something? So I broke it out into 4 steps. Research, which is what they're in right now. So figuring out what the problem is, where do we need to be, and how do we get there? And then once we figure out how do we get there, because I have the depth of knowledge on the council, then they can actually develop the actual steps, the 1, 2, 3, 4, in order to get to the solution, right? So then that's the planning, that's step 2. We plan it, and then we look at implementing it. Something that government people don't like to do is putting price tags on things. Probably because that usually means we're like going and asking for money, and then that usually means that you all pay for more money, for more things, right? I hope not to do that, although in cybersecurity I'm pretty sure that will come about. But when you're looking at implementation, it's also about who can do it, right? It isn't always going to be the government. A lot of these private sectors are already doing awesome things and have great tools for free that other people can have. So what we're doing is just creating the framework to share those tools to the small businesses and the individual people and the local governments so that people can have information, because they're never going to spend the money on a cybersecurity firm. We're okay with that. I've made peace with that. So how do I get them to a minimal viability of cybersecurity and be able to raise all the cybersecurity for the state to the next level? And then evaluation. A lot of people stop when they just go throw something out, right? Like, we're going to go and do some brochures, and we're going to do like some media, and that should be it. We've increased cybersecurity awareness, and so now Indiana is better than any other state. No, not really. Because as we said earlier, we need to know how much we were effective, right? So when 70% of you raise your hands and realize that you are going to be the problem, then it's my job to figure out how do I decrease that risk, right? If I provide you training, but then test you on that training by giving you emails to see if you're going to click on something or not, and then we do that over and over again and you learn your lesson, now I've dropped my 70 down to 40%. Now I've dropped it to 30%. Is it ever going to be 100%? Nope. It's never going to be 100% because we're human. We're going to make mistakes. And frankly, the people are very sophisticated about these emails now. They're sophisticated about social engineering. They know psychology. They understand how it works. They understand it better than the people who are trying to solve the problems. So my role is to make those connections. If they're ahead of the game because they understand psychology, they realize it is a human issue, it isn't a technology issue, then we need to do the same thing. We need to figure out how we catch up to the bell curve. And so what we're doing is we're drafting a plan, and we're going to be giving that to the governor, but it's not just a plan of things. Every group, all 19 groups, is developing one aspect of the overarching statewide plan, in addition to deliverables that will be free for people in the state of Indiana. And we have a website, it's called in.gov/cybersecurity, that will be developed out of it. So with that, do I have any questions? I'll say questions that I had when I came into this role and questions that have been asked for me. So what's the weirdest thing that you can say without getting in trouble that you found out that kind of freaked you out, right? It's a good one. So how many of you have ever rented a car or been in a rental car? Yep. So smart cars, right? There's so many advantages to it. There are computers in it. It's like so great. It like does things and it connects to your phone. It connects to everything. I mean, it's amazing, right? And it's great, especially on long road trips. So one of the things I found out was whenever you rent a car, you may, those plugs that go into the cigarette lighter and you can charge that way, but sometimes you can just charge by directly putting your phone into the USB drive, right? Well, when you do that, depending on the make and model of the car, it's taking information, not just happening during the drive, it's taking information out of your phone completely. So it's taking pictures, it's taking texts that didn't just happen during the drive, like all texts, and it's taking all this information. Now, when it's your own car and it's your own information, that's one thing. But when you rent a car, you sign an agreement, again, back to the not reading the terms and use the agreements, you sign an agreement that when you give back that car, everything on that car, including the information taken from your phone, is now the property of that company. Yeah. So when I said that, I was like, what? How many times? I'm like, how many times have I put my phone into a USB hook on a car, even a friend's car? And now it's like IT people. I'm like, are you going to use my information? So that's something to consider, right? So that is how integrated we are with technology. But most importantly, why would a car need to take every text and every picture and all your albums and all your music and your preference and the websites you visit and by also all the locations you've been in the last 6 months. Why would a piece of technology need that information if you are just going from point A to point B in 10 miles and you just want to listen to your favorite song? Yeah. Yep, there is. He said if you commit a crime, they can do that, absolutely. Now, do you think that the private companies are readily giving that information to the law enforcement? So then why would the companies do that? Ads, sales, marketing, right? I mean, it's what we hear about on Facebook all the time, right? Is how are they using our information to get to us because we're going to pay attention because they have keywords in there from a psychological perspective of engineering us to click on something that maybe we shouldn't click, right? So even from that's the benefit, right? So from people who are interested in criminology and the forensics aspect of it, the benefit is we can use this technology to help us, right? There have been multiple cases and case studies I'm sure all of you will be reading about in your studies and moving and going forward where bad guys have been caught because they did things like went and rented a car, and because the car is a super smart car, they put their location in. You can also tell when they opened, not only when they were at a location, but that they opened the trunk, and then they opened the sides, and then it was a van, and now all of a sudden the weight on it was different. I mean, it gets really specific, and it's great for enforcement if enforcement can get their hands on it, right? We have people like Google for whatever you may go on that. They split your information up. So who uses Google here? Even to just look up information. Come on, that's like everybody, right? Nobody, yeah. So Google ties all that information, but then they separate all the information. So the other tidbit I've learned. They separate all your information and send it out to other countries. Now, from a legality perspective, they do that for a couple of reasons. One, they say they diversify it so that their information can't be hacked all at once. But from a legal perspective, when an enforcement agency has asked for information from somebody's account, they've denied it because guess what countries they're in, the information in? Countries that we don't have access to. So Google has literally told the FBI and enforcement agencies to take that and put it somewhere where the sun don't shine because we're not going to give you this information because it's our people's information. People go and use our services. They can go Google how to kill somebody with, a pen or how to kill somebody during a middle of a lecture and get away with it. You can Google it and not raise any red flags because of a privacy aspect that Google takes seriously. Now, from a consumer side, that person probably really appreciates Google doing that. And even us, we probably appreciate Google having some kind of limitation of not sharing all our information with everybody. But and from a philosophical perspective, when does that become an issue when it starts harming the greater good? And I think that's a lot of what maybe you guys what you're interested in, right? When does that become the issue of privacy versus the philosophy of oversharing? And then when does it become an issue even with Equifax? There's lawsuits in it, but some of the preliminary debate on it is unless you can prove to me that specific information wasn't already stolen by other breaches, and we specifically, our breach caused you harm. So even this poor lady that has been hacked 17 times after the Equifax breach, her information was hacked because her social security was used and her name was used, because of all the breaches that have occurred, Equifax is arguing that you can't you can't say that was only us. That could have been Anthem, that could have been Target, that could have been MasterCard, that could have been Chase. They have your name and social security number, right? So now it becomes a legal issue. Where's that line between personal responsibility of businesses, and then at the end of the day, it's you. You make the difference on whether or not and how we move forward in this field. And so, which is why it's important to talk to all of you to understand that the workforce is out there. They want you. You're going to make a lot of money going into it, but it's going to be hard work. It's going to be something you have to keep up with it. But it's going to be exciting, and it's going to be ever evolving. It's definitely not going to be boring. So, with that, any other questions?
Awesome. Well, in that case, big round of applause and thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.